Picture this. You're 7 months pregnant, making breakfast in your $20 million mansion, when your phone buzzes with a text that destroys your entire world. Not just any text, but one meant for someone else. One that reveals your husband doesn't just have a mistress, but has been systematically planning to destroy you. Sarah Mitchell thought she had the perfect life: a tech mogul husband, unlimited wealth, security for her unborn child. But that morning, she discovered the fairy tale was actually a nightmare, and the man she trusted most was about to become her most dangerous enemy. What happens when a pregnant woman with no money, no lawyers, and no allies faces off against a billionaire who will stop at nothing to silence her? What happens when that billionaire crosses a line so horrific that it transforms a gentle social worker into an unstoppable force of justice? This is the true story of how one woman's courage brought down a criminal empire and proved that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. Stay with me for the next hour, because this story will grab you by the throat and not let go until justice is served. Sarah Mitchell sat in the marble kitchen of her Malibu home, one hand resting on her 7-month pregnant belly, the other wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden light across the pristine countertops. Everything looked perfect, just as her husband Richard demanded. But perfection was an illusion, and Sarah was about to discover just how fragile that illusion could be. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Richard, or so she thought. Instead, she found herself reading a message meant for someone else entirely. "Baby, last night was incredible. Can't wait to get rid of the ball and chain situation. The pregnancy complicates things, but my lawyer says we can handle it. She's too naive to see what's coming. Love you, A." Sarah's hands trembled as she read the message again and again. The words burned into her mind like acid. Ball and chain. The pregnancy complicates things. She's too naive. Her Richard, her husband of 4 years, the man who had sworn to love and protect her, the man whose child she carried. The phone slipped from her fingers, clattering against the marble floor. The sound echoed through the empty house like a gunshot. Sarah had met Richard Wellington 5 years ago at a charity gala in Detroit. She had been working as a social worker then, helping families navigate crisis situations. He was the keynote speaker, a tech mogul worth hundreds of millions, discussing his company's latest innovations in artificial intelligence. When he approached her after his speech, she had been starstruck. Richard Wellington, featured on magazine covers, sought after by investors worldwide, was asking her about her work. He seemed genuinely interested in her passion for helping people. Her stories of families she had saved from poverty and abuse. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of private jets and 5-star restaurants. Richard showered her with attention, gifts, and promises of a future where she could help people on a global scale through his foundation. When he proposed on a beach in Santorini, Sarah felt like Cinderella. The wedding had been featured in Architectural Digest. Sarah wore a custom Vera Wang gown. Celebrities and tech titans filled the guest list. Her family from Detroit looked overwhelmed but proud. Her sister Jenny, a nurse, had whispered, "You did it! Sarah, you found your prince." But princes, Sarah was learning, could be wolves in designer suits. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and scrolled through Richard's contacts. There it was, Amber Cross, the name she had heard Richard mention casually over dinner parties. His head of marketing. He called her a rising star in the company. Sarah's mind raced through recent memories with new clarity. Richard's late nights at the office, his sudden business trips, the way he had become distant when she announced her pregnancy, how he had suggested they wait to have children, even though they had been trying for 2 years. The nausea that hit her had nothing to do with pregnancy hormones. She thought about confronting him immediately, but something held her back. Maybe it was the social worker in her, trained to gather evidence before making accusations. Or maybe it was the small voice in her head warning her that she was about to enter a battle she was not prepared for. Sarah walked to Richard's home office, a glass-walled sanctuary overlooking the Pacific Ocean. His desk was meticulously organized, laptop closed, papers filed away. But she knew Richard. He was meticulous about some things and careless about others. She found what she was looking for in his desk drawer: a credit card statement he had printed but forgotten to shred, Charges at expensive restaurants on nights he claimed to be in late meetings. Hotel rooms when he said he was staying at the office. Jewelry purchases she had never received. The evidence painted a picture she could no longer deny. Her perfect husband, her fairy tale marriage, her secure future, all of it was a lie. As she sat in Richard's chair, staring out at the endless blue ocean, Sarah felt something shift inside her. The naive social worker who had fallen for a tech mogul's charm was gone. In her place sat a woman who finally understood the game she was playing, and she was losing badly. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it really was Richard. Working late again tonight. Sweetheart, don't wait up. Love you? Sarah stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time in their marriage, she did something Richard would never expect. She lied back. Of course, darling. I'll be here when you get home. Love you too. But Sarah Mitchell would not be waiting like a faithful wife. She would be planning. Because if Richard thought she was too naive to see what was coming, he was about to learn how wrong he could be. Richard Wellington returned home at 2 in the morning, moving through their Malibu mansion with the practiced quiet of a man accustomed to deception. He expected to find Sarah asleep, curled up in their king-size bed with her pregnancy pillow, just as she had been for months. Instead, he found her sitting in the living room, still dressed, still awake. The lamp beside her cast a soft glow across her face, highlighting the tears she had shed and the resolve that had replaced them. Sarah, Richard's voice carried a note of confusion. What are you doing up? Are you feeling all right? She held up her phone, the damning text message displayed on the screen. Richard's face went through a series of emotions: confusion, recognition, calculation, and finally cold assessment. We need to talk, Sarah said, her voice steadier than she felt. Richard loosened his tie, that familiar gesture she had once found attractive. Now it seemed predatory, like a snake shedding its skin. I can explain, he said, but his tone held no remorse, only irritation at being caught. Can you? Sarah stood slowly, her hand supporting her lower back. Can you explain calling your wife a ball and chain? Can you explain discussing our unborn child like a business problem to be solved? Richard walked to the bar cart and poured himself a scotch. He didn't offer her anything, didn't ask how she was feeling. Those small courtesies had disappeared months ago, but Sarah was only now recognizing their absence. Sarah, you're being emotional, Richard said, taking a sip of his drink. Pregnancy hormones make you irrational. We both know that. The condescension in his voice hit her like a physical blow. This was a tactic she recognized from her social work training. Gaslighting, making the victim question their own perception of reality. Don't you dare, Sarah said, standing taller despite her exhaustion. Don't you dare use my pregnancy to dismiss what you've done. Richard sighed, as if dealing with an unreasonable child. Fine. Yes, I've been seeing Amber. It's not serious. Sarah, it's just. You've been so focused on the baby, so tired all the time. I needed something for myself. The casual cruelty of his words took her breath away. He wasn't even trying to deny it. He was justifying it. Something for yourself, Sarah's voice cracked. I'm carrying your child, Richard. I gave up my career, my life in Detroit, everything to be your wife, and you needed something for yourself. You gave up a social worker's salary to live in a $20 million house, Richard shot back, his mask finally slipping. You wear designer clothes, drive luxury cars, travel the world. Don't act like you've sacrificed anything meaningful. There it was, his true feelings. Sarah had always been a transaction to him, a beautiful accessory who enhanced his image and made him look like a family man to investors and the press. I loved you, Sarah whispered. Love is a luxury. Sarah, I gave you security instead. And what about our child? Richard's expression hardened. That depends entirely on you. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah felt ice in her veins despite the warm California night. What do you mean? Richard set down his glass and walked to his desk. He pulled out a folder, legal documents Sarah recognized as the prenuptial agreement she had signed 5 years ago. You signed this willingly, Sarah? If you choose to make this difficult, if you choose to embarrass me publicly, you'll walk away with exactly what this document stipulates. $50,000 and whatever personal items you brought into the marriage. Sarah stared at the papers. She remembered signing them, remembered her lawyer, a friend of Richard's, assuring her they were standard. She had been so in love, so trusting. The prenup had seemed like a formality, something that would never matter because they were going to be together forever. What about child support, she asked. Joint custody, minimum state requirements. Richard's smile was cold. Unless, of course, you prove to be an unfit mother. Pregnant women can be so unstable, so prone to substance abuse, depression, poor decision-making. The implication was clear. Richard had thought this through. He had plans within plans, legal strategies she couldn't begin to understand. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about business, Sarah, and that's all this ever was. Sarah felt the fight drain out of her. She had thought she was prepared for this confrontation, but Richard had been preparing much longer. He held all the cards, controlled all the resources, had legal and financial weapons she didn't even know existed. There is another option, Richard continued, his voice softer now, almost gentle. We can make this easy. You take a generous settlement, much more generous than the prenup requires, and you disappear. Quietly. You raise the child somewhere far from here. I'll provide support, but at a distance. No scandal, no messy divorce proceedings, no public humiliation. You want me to disappear? I want you to be smart. Sarah looked around the living room that had never felt like home. The expensive furniture chosen by Richard's decorator, the art selected by his advisor, the life she had built that was never really hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Jenny in Detroit. How are you feeling? Can't wait to meet my niece or nephew. You're going to be such an amazing mom. The words broke something open in Sarah's chest. Jenny believed in her. Her family believed in her. She was about to become a mother, responsible for another human being. What kind of example would she set if she simply disappeared when things got difficult? I need time to think, Sarah said finally. Richard nodded, satisfied. Take all the time you need. But Sarah, don't mistake kindness for weakness. I'm offering you a way out with dignity intact. That offer won't last forever. As Richard headed upstairs to their bedroom, Sarah remained in the living room, staring out at the dark ocean. She pressed her hands to her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. I'm sorry, little one, she whispered. I'm so sorry I brought you into this mess. But even as she spoke the words, another voice whispered in her mind, the voice of every woman she had helped during her years as a social worker, women who had faced impossible odds and found the strength to fight back. You're not powerless, the voice said. You just don't know your power yet. Sarah didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in the darkness, planning. 3 days after their confrontation, Sarah decided to give Richard one last chance. Despite everything, a part of her still hoped the man she had fallen in love with existed somewhere beneath the cold calculation. She prepared his favorite dinner and waited. When Richard finally came home at 9 p.m., he seemed genuinely surprised by the effort. What's all this? He asked, looking at the candlelit table. The wine he loved, but she couldn't drink. I've been thinking about what you said, Sarah began carefully. About us, about the future. Richard sat down across from her, his expression guarded but interested. I love you, Richard, she continued, the words painful but necessary. I love the man I married. I know things have been difficult with the pregnancy, with my emotions. Maybe we can work through this. Maybe Amber was just a mistake. For a moment, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Something that might have been regret. Sarah held her breath. Then his expression hardened again. Sarah, you're a good woman, he said, cutting into his steak. But you're living in a fantasy. What we had was never real. It was business. A beneficial arrangement that's outlived its usefulness. The words hit her like physical blows, but she pressed on. What about our child? Richard set down his fork and looked at her with something approaching pity. You should consider your options. The euphemism hung in the air between them. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her belly, protecting the life growing inside her. You want me to have an abortion? I want you to be realistic. You're 32 years old with no career, no resources of your own. You'd be a single mother trying to raise a child on $50,000. That's not fair to the child. Sarah, his tone was reasonable, logical, as if he were discussing a business proposal rather than their unborn child. You already consulted lawyers about child support, didn't you? Sarah asked, pieces falling into place. You've been planning this. The prenup, the settlement offer, everything. Richard's silence was answer enough. Sarah stood up from the table, her legs unsteady. Get out. Sarah, get out of this house right now. Richard stood slowly, smoothing his tie. This is my house, Sarah. You'd do well to remember that. Then I'll leave. Where will you go? Your family can barely afford their own bills. You have no friends here who aren't my friends first. You have no resources, no support system, no options. Each word was calculated to wound, and they hit their marks. Sarah had isolated herself in Richard's world, abandoned her own life to build his. You're right, she said quietly. I have nothing. Richard's expression softened slightly. That's why my offer is generous. Sarah, take it. Start over somewhere else. Find someone who wants what you're offering. After Richard left, presumably to spend another night with Amber, Sarah collapsed onto their bed and sobbed until she had no tears left. He was right about everything. She had no career to return to, no savings of her own, no support system in California. She called her sister Jenny in Detroit. Sarah, it's late there. Is everything okay? Through broken sobs, Sarah told her sister everything. The affair, the prenup, Richard's threats about custody. Come home, Jenny said immediately. Come home right now. We'll figure this out. I can't afford to fight him. Jenny, he has unlimited resources, the best lawyers. I'd lose the baby. You don't know that. I do know that. I've seen it happen to other women. I used to help them. Remember, the system protects men like Richard. Jenny was quiet for a long moment. What about that friend from college, Marcus something? Didn't he become a lawyer? Marcus Torres. Sarah hadn't thought about him in years. They had dated briefly in college before remaining friends. He had gone to law school while she pursued social work. Marcus specializes in corporate law, Sarah said. This isn't his area, but he might know someone who can help. Sarah, you can't give up. That baby needs you to fight. After they hung up, Sarah stared at her phone for a long time before finally searching for Marcus's contact information. She found his law firm's website easily enough, Torres, Martinez, and Associates, a successful practice in downtown Los Angeles. She drafted a dozen messages before settling on something simple. Hi, Marcus. It's Sarah Mitchell. I know it's been years, but I find myself in need of legal advice. Could we possibly meet for coffee? I understand if you're too busy. She sent the message at midnight and didn't expect a response for days. Instead, her phone rang within an hour. Sarah, my God, I was just thinking about you. I saw your wedding announcement years ago. How are you? His voice was exactly as she remembered. Warm, genuine, with a slight accent from his childhood in East LA. I'm not good, Marcus. I'm really not good. Tell me what's happening. So she did. Marcus listened without interruption as she explained about Richard's affair, the prenup, the threats about custody. Jesus Christ, Sarah, Richard Wellington. I've heard of him. His company's been in the news. You have. There have been some rumors. SEC investigations. Whistleblower complaints. Nothing proven, but whispers. Corporate types love to gossip. Sarah's heart began to race. What kind of whispers? Financial irregularities. Inflated user numbers to attract investors. Possible fraud. But Sarah, that's not your immediate problem. We need to focus on protecting you and your child. Can you help me? I can try, but I have to warn you, Sarah, men like Richard don't fight fair. If we challenge him, he's going to come at you with everything he has. Sarah thought about her unborn child, about the kind of life she wanted to provide, about the women she had helped who found the courage to fight back against impossible odds. I know, she said, I'm ready. But as she hung up the phone, Sarah realized she had no idea how devastating Richard's retaliation would be. Marcus Torres arrived at Sarah's house the next morning, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a concerned expression that reminded her why they had been friends in college. Unlike Richard's associates, who dressed to impress. Marcus dressed to work, a simple navy suit, sensible shoes, and the kind of genuine smile Sarah hadn't seen in months. "You look good," he said, though they both knew it was a kind lie. Sarah's pregnancy glow had been replaced by exhaustion and stress. "How are you feeling?" "Like my life is falling apart," Sarah replied, leading him into the living room. "But thank you for coming." Marcus set his briefcase on the coffee table and pulled out a legal pad. "Before we start, I need you to understand something. I primarily handle corporate litigation, not family law, but I've consulted with colleagues, and I think I can help you." Richard says the prenup is ironclad. Prenups can be challenged, especially when there's evidence of coercion, fraud, or unconscionable terms. The fact that you were pressured to sign without independent counsel is significant. Sarah felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in days. "Really, there's more. You mentioned Richard consulted lawyers about child support. If we can prove he was planning to divorce you while encouraging you to get pregnant, that could constitute fraud. A man can induce his wife to have children while secretly planning to abandon them." The hope grew stronger. Marcus continued reviewing the prenup documents, occasionally making notes or asking questions about specific clauses. "This is actually helpful," Marcus said after an hour. "The language here is overly broad. A good family law attorney could argue several sections are unenforceable. Can you recommend someone? I know the best divorce attorney in California, Jessica Chen. She's expensive, but she's brilliant, and she hates men who abuse their financial power." Sarah's heart sank. "I can't afford expensive. Let me worry about that for now. First, we need to gather evidence. Financial records, communications with Amber, anything that shows Richard's been planning this deception." They spent the next 3 hours going through Richard's home office. Sarah felt guilty at first, but Marcus reminded her that as Richard's wife, she had legal access to their shared financial information. What they found was damning. Credit card statements showing a pattern of expensive gifts and hotel rooms dating back over a year. Email exchanges with lawyers discussing asset protection strategies. Most importantly, Marcus found communication with Richard's accountant about transferring money to offshore accounts. "He's been moving assets," Marcus explained. "This isn't just about an affair. Sarah, he's been systematically hiding marital property. Can we stop him? We can try. I'll file an emergency motion to freeze the accounts. If Richard is moving money to hide it from divorce proceedings, a judge will intervene." For the first time in days, Sarah felt like she could breathe. Marcus seemed confident, knowledgeable. She wasn't facing this alone anymore. "There's something else," Marcus said, pulling out another document. "I did some research on Richard's company. Remember those rumors I mentioned? I think there might be more to them than gossip." He showed her a series of news articles about Richard's company, AI dynamics, reports of inflated user numbers, misleading investor presentations, possible SEC violations. If Richard's company is built on fraud, his personal assets could be at risk. That changes everything about your divorce settlement. Sarah stared at the articles. Richard had always been so proud of his success, so confident in his business acumen. The possibility that it was all built on lies felt both devastating and oddly satisfying. "What do we do next?" "I contact Jessica Chen. We file the emergency motions, and we prepare for war, because Richard is going to fight back hard." That afternoon, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. Marcus had found legal strategies she didn't know existed. The prenup could be challenged. Richard's hidden assets could be recovered. Their child would be provided for. She actually smiled as she prepared dinner, something she hadn't done in months. When Richard came home early, a rare occurrence, she was humming softly to herself. "You seem happy," Richard observed, loosening his tie. "I had a good day," Sarah replied, not entirely lying. "Good. I've been thinking about our conversation, about options for handling this situation." Sarah tensed, but Richard's tone seemed genuinely conciliatory. "I spoke with my lawyers," he continued. "I may have been hasty. The prenup is valid, but I'm willing to be more generous than it requires. Significantly more generous." "What are you talking about?" Richard sat down at the kitchen island, suddenly looking tired and older than his 45 years. "I don't want to be the bad guy in this. Sarah, I know I've handled things poorly. The affair was a mistake. You deserve better. Sarah stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception. But Richard looked genuinely regretful, almost vulnerable. I'm prepared to offer you $2 million, he said quietly, plus ongoing child support at twice the state requirements. You can live comfortably anywhere you choose. Our child will never want for anything. $2 million. More money than Sarah had ever imagined having. Enough to buy a house, start a new life, ensure her child's education and future. Why? She asked. Because you're right. You gave up everything for me. You deserve to be compensated for that sacrifice. Richard reached across the counter and took her hand. His touch was gentle, familiar. For a moment, Sarah remembered why she had fallen in love with him. I don't want to fight you in court, he continued. I don't want our child to grow up reading about our divorce in tabloids. This way, we can end this with dignity. Sarah's mind raced. $2 million would give her independence, security. She could raise her child without worrying about money, could return to social work if she wanted. It was more than generous. It was life-changing. I need time to think, she said. Of course. But Sarah, my lawyers are concerned about some recent developments, financial irregularities they've discovered. They're recommending immediate action to protect company assets. This offer may not be available much longer. The veiled threat was delivered so softly, so reasonably, that Sarah almost missed it. But she caught the implication. Accept the generous offer now, or risk getting nothing later. That night, Sarah lay awake weighing her options. Richard's offer was tempting, more than tempting. It was practical, sensible, safe. She could disappear to someplace quiet, raise her child without the stress of legal battles, start fresh. But something nagged at her. Richard never did anything without calculating every angle. Why was he suddenly so generous? What had changed between yesterday and today? She thought about calling Marcus, then decided to wait. She needed to consider Richard's offer carefully, rationally. $2 million wasn't something to dismiss lightly. The next morning, she woke to find Richard already gone. A note on his pillow read, "Think carefully about your future. Some opportunities don't come twice." Sarah was still considering the note when her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, we have a problem," he said without preamble. "A big problem." "What kind of problem? I've been disbarred." The words didn't make sense at first. "What, the California State Bar received a complaint about my representation of you. Conflict of interest. Because we dated in college. They're claiming I can't represent you ethically. It's bullshit, but the damage is done. I can't be your attorney." Sarah felt the walls closing in around her. "Can you still help unofficially? Not without risking my entire career?" "Sarah, I'm sorry. This came out of nowhere." But it hadn't come out of nowhere. Sarah understood immediately who had orchestrated Marcus's removal. "Richard," she whispered. "I think so. And Sarah, there's more bad news. Jessica Chen suddenly isn't available to take your case. Her entire firm has declined representation due to a conflict of interest with Richard's company." One by one, Richard was eliminating her options, removing her support system, isolating her completely. "What do I do now? I don't know. I wish I could help, but my hands are tied. Maybe Richard's settlement offer isn't so bad after all." After Marcus hung up, Sarah sat in her empty house and felt the hope that had sustained her crumble completely. Richard had outmaneuvered her before the battle had even begun. $2 million was starting to look less like generosity and more like a trap, but it might be the only trap she could afford to accept. The morning after Marcus was disbarred, Sarah discovered Richard had moved beyond legal maneuvering to something far more sinister. She woke to find her credit cards declined at the grocery store, her bank accounts frozen, and a notice from their insurance company that her coverage had been suspended pending a policy review. When she confronted Richard that evening, he was waiting for her with a glass of wine and an expression of manufactured concern. "I heard you had some trouble today," he said, not offering her a drink. "Financial difficulties. You know exactly what happened." "Do I? I know my accountants discovered some irregularities in our joint accounts, unusual spending patterns, suspicious transactions. They felt it was necessary to freeze everything pending an investigation." Sarah stared at him. Suspicious transactions. Richard pulled out a folder. He always had folders prepared. Sarah realized documentation for every cruelty, large cash withdrawals over the past month, payments to a private investigator, consulting fees paid to a disgraced attorney. My accountants are concerned you might be planning to hide marital assets. The audacity was breathtaking. Richard was accusing her of the very crimes he was committing. I withdrew cash for groceries because I was embarrassed to use credit cards for small purchases. The payments to Marcus were for legal consultation, which is my right. Is it the courts might see it differently? A pregnant woman displaying erratic financial behavior, consorting with disbarred lawyers, making secretive transactions. These could be signs of mental instability. There it was. The trap Sarah was beginning to understand. Richard wasn't just trying to win a divorce. He was building a case to prove she was unfit to raise their child. You're documenting everything. Aren't you creating a paper trail to use against me? Richard's smile was cold. I'm protecting my interests, Sarah, just as any reasonable person would do. That night, Sarah called every attorney in Los Angeles who specialized in family law. One by one, they declined to represent her. Conflict of interest with Richard's company. Schedule too full. Not the right fit. The rejections were polite but definitive. By the fourth day, Sarah understood she was being systematically isolated. Richard had used his wealth and connections to ensure she couldn't find adequate legal representation. She was facing one of California's most ruthless attorneys with no lawyer of her own. The emotional toll was devastating, but the physical impact was worse. The stress triggered contractions that sent Sarah to the hospital at 3 a.m. She sat alone in the emergency room, clutching her belly, terrified she was losing the baby. Mrs. Wellington. A young doctor appeared with a chart. I'm Dr. Rodriguez. How are you feeling? The contractions stopped. Sarah said, Is the baby okay? The baby is fine, but your blood pressure is dangerously high, and you're showing signs of severe stress. This isn't good for either of you. Dr. Rodriguez sat down beside her, his expression kind but concerned. Mrs. Wellington, I have to ask, are you safe at home? Are you experiencing any domestic stress that might be contributing to this? The question hung in the air. Sarah could tell the truth. Explain about Richard's psychological warfare, his systematic destruction of her support system. But what would happen then? Richard would claim she was being dramatic, unstable, her words against his, with no proof of his manipulation. Just normal pregnancy stress, she said finally. Dr. Rodriguez didn't look convinced, but he couldn't force her to elaborate. I'm prescribing medication for anxiety, he said. But Mrs. Wellington, if you need help, there are resources available. Sarah took the prescription, knowing Richard would use even this against her. Evidence of mental instability, proof that she couldn't handle the stress of raising a child. When she arrived home, she found Richard waiting with another folder. I heard about your hospital visit, he said. Are you all right? Is the baby okay? His concern sounded genuine, but Sarah no longer trusted anything about him. We're fine. Good, but Sarah, this proves my point. The stress of fighting me is dangerous for you and the child. You're hospitalized at 3 a.m. because you can't handle the pressure. The pressure you're creating. The pressure of an unnecessary legal battle. Take my offer. Sarah, $2 million, generous child support, and no more stress. You can raise our child in peace. Your offer assumes I'll disappear quietly. It assumes you'll be practical. That weekend, Sarah's sister Jenny flew in from Detroit. She took one look at Sarah and demanded to know what was happening. You look terrible, Jenny said bluntly. You've lost weight. You're pale. You look like you haven't slept in weeks. I haven't, Sarah explained everything. Richard's affair, the legal maneuvering, the frozen accounts, her inability to find representation. This is domestic abuse, Jenny said angrily. Financial abuse, psychological abuse. You can't let him get away with this. What choice do I have? Fight back, expose him, go to the press, social media, anywhere people will listen. And say what that my rich husband is leaving me for a younger woman. That's not news, Jenny. That's Tuesday in Los Angeles. Jenny paced the living room, her nursing training evident in the way she approached problems systematically. What about his business? You said Marcus found evidence of financial irregularities. Sarah had nearly forgotten about Richard's potential corporate fraud in the chaos of her personal crisis. I don't understand business finance well enough to know what it means. Then find someone who does. Jenny spent the afternoon researching financial journalists, corporate investigators, anyone who might be interested in Richard's business practices. She found David Kim, a business reporter for the Wall Street Journal who had written extensively about tech industry fraud. Call him, Jenny urged. Maybe Richard's personal life isn't news, but corporate fraud affecting investors definitely is. Sarah hesitated. Going to the press felt like a point of no return, a declaration of war she wasn't sure she could win. Sarah, Jenny said gently, you're not just fighting for yourself anymore. You're fighting for that baby. What kind of father do you want her to have? What kind of example do you want to set? That evening, after Jenny caught her flight back to Detroit, Sarah sat alone in the mansion that had become her prison. She thought about her unborn child, about the kind of world she was bringing her into. She thought about her own mother, a strong woman who had worked 2 jobs to support Sarah and Jenny after their father left. Her mother had never backed down from a fight when it mattered. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed David Kim's number. Mr. Kim, my name is Sarah Wellington. I believe my husband's company is committing fraud, and I think you might be interested in the story. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Mrs. Wellington, David Kim said carefully, I think we should meet. As Sarah scheduled the meeting, she realized she had just crossed a line from which there would be no return. Richard had pushed her too far, isolated her too completely, threatened her child's future too directly. He wanted a war, he was about to get one, but Sarah had no idea how ruthless Richard could be when truly cornered. The meeting with David Kim took place at a small cafe in Santa Monica, far from Richard's usual haunts. Sarah arrived early, nervous but determined. Kim was younger than she expected, maybe 35, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the manner of someone accustomed to uncovering secrets. Thank you for meeting me, Sarah said as he sat down across from her. I have to admit, Mrs. Wellington, this is unusual. Why would the wife of a tech CEO want to expose her husband's business practices? Sarah told him about the divorce, the hidden assets, the pattern of financial manipulation. Kim listened without judgment, occasionally taking notes. I've been investigating AI dynamics for months, he said finally, but it's difficult to prove fraud without inside information. Corporate whistleblowers are rare, and usually they're disgruntled employees, not family members. What kind of fraud are we talking about? Kim pulled out his tablet and showed her a series of articles and financial reports. User inflation is the big one. AI Dynamics claims 20 million active users for their platform. My sources suggest the real number is closer to 5 million. They've been using bots and fake accounts to inflate metrics for investors. Sarah studied the documents, remembering Richard's triumphant presentations to venture capitalists, his celebration dinners after successful funding rounds. There's also evidence of self-dealing. Richard's been using company money to purchase services from other companies he owns through shell corporations. Essentially, he's paying himself with investor money. Is that illegal? If he's not disclosing the relationships to investors? Absolutely. It's securities fraud. Kim leaned forward, his expression intense. Mrs. Wellington, if you have access to Richard's financial records, his communications with investors, anything that proves deliberate deception, it could be the key to exposing everything. Sarah thought about Richard's home office, the files she had access to as his wife. She could photograph documents, copy hard drives, gather the evidence Kim needed. What happens if I help you? I publish the story. The SEC investigates. If the evidence is solid, Richard faces criminal charges. His company collapses. His personal assets become subject to seizure. It would destroy him completely. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction, followed immediately by terror. If Richard lost everything, what would happen to her and the baby? I need to think about this, she said. Kim gave her his card. Don't think too long, Mrs. Wellington. Richard is planning a major funding round next month. If he succeeds in defrauding new investors, the damage will be much worse. That evening, Sarah returned home to find Richard waiting with champagne and her favorite Thai takeout. What's the occasion? She asked warily. Good news. My lawyers have resolved the issues with our joint accounts. Everything should be unfrozen by tomorrow. Sarah sat down across from him, studying his face for signs of deception. Richard seemed genuinely pleased, almost celebratory. There's more, he continued. I spoke with my accountants about your settlement. I can increase the offer to $3 million, plus a trust fund for the baby that will ensure college tuition and living expenses through graduate school. $3 million. The number was staggering. Sarah tried to process what it meant. Complete financial independence, security for her child's entire life, freedom from the legal battle that was destroying her health. Why the increase? Because I want this resolved quickly and quietly. My company is about to go public. Sarah, the last thing I need is a messy divorce in the headlines. There it was. Richard wasn't being generous. He was protecting his business interests. The IPO Kim had mentioned. Richard needed the divorce settled before his fraud was exposed. I'll need to review any settlement agreement with an attorney, Sarah said. Of course. I've arranged for you to meet with Sandra Hayes tomorrow. She's an excellent family law attorney, completely independent. She'll review everything and make sure your interests are protected. Sarah nodded, but something felt wrong. Richard was being too accommodating, too generous. In her experience, when abusive people suddenly became reasonable, it usually meant they were planning something worse. That night, she researched Sandra Hayes online. Excellent reviews, decades of experience, apparently legitimate. But buried deep in the search results, Sarah found what she was looking for. Hayes had represented several of Richard's business associates in their divorces. All had settled quickly and quietly for less than they might have received in court. Sarah realized Richard had found a lawyer who would appear to represent her interests while actually serving his needs. She spent the night thinking about David Kim's offer, about the evidence sitting in Richard's office, about the choice between $3 million in blood money and the possibility of justice. The next morning brought devastating news that made the choice academic. Sarah's phone rang at 7 a.m. It was a Detroit number she didn't recognize. Is this Sarah Wellington? The voice was official, strained. Yes, who is this? This is Dr. Patricia Reeves at Henry Ford Hospital. I'm calling about your sister, Jenny Walsh. Sarah's blood turned to ice. There's been an accident. The words came in fragments. Car accident, critical condition, multiple injuries. The other driver had run a red light, T-boning Jenny's car on her way to work. She was alive but in intensive care. I need to come home, Sarah said, already planning flights in her head. Mrs. Wellington, your sister is uninsured. The Accident Victim Assistance Program can help with some costs, but the surgery she needs, it's going to be expensive. Sarah hung up and immediately called Richard. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting. I heard, he said before she could speak. I'm so sorry. Sarah, how is she? She needs surgery. They're saying $150,000. Maybe more. Richard, I need help. Of course. I'll have my assistant arrange a medical loan immediately. The best care money can buy? Relief flooded through Sarah. Whatever their problems, Richard was still offering to help her family in crisis. But Sarah, Richard continued, his tone shifting, this tragedy proves my point about settling our situation quickly. Your sister needs immediate help. The insurance company won't pay while your assets are tied up in litigation. If you accept my settlement offer, I can transfer money to the hospital today. Sarah felt the trap closing around her. Richard's timing was too perfect, his solution too convenient. Richard, did I what Sarah? You're in shock. You're not thinking clearly. Your sister needs help right now. Today, I can provide that help, but only if we resolve our legal issues. Sarah stared at her phone, understanding finally how thoroughly Richard had planned his victory. The frozen accounts, the disbarred lawyer, the convenient car accident, each move designed to corner her completely. I'll take the settlement, she whispered. I'll have Sandra Hayes draw up the papers immediately. You can sign them this afternoon, and I'll wire the money to Detroit within hours. As Sarah hung up, she felt something die inside her. Richard had won, but the victory had cost him whatever remained of his humanity. And Sarah realized that a man capable of such calculated cruelty was capable of anything, including destroying the mother of his own child if she continued to threaten his empire. Sarah signed the settlement papers at 3 p.m. in Sandra Hayes's Beverly Hills office. Her hands shook as she wrote her name, signing away her rights to challenge Richard's assets, to pursue alimony beyond the agreed amount, to expose his business practices. In exchange, she received $3 million and a promise that Jenny's medical bills would be paid immediately. Sandra Hayes was professional but cold, reading through terms so quickly that Sarah could barely follow. Every time Sarah asked for clarification, Hayes assured her the terms were standard, generous, nothing to worry about. This non-disclosure agreement, Sarah said, pointing to a clause she finally understood. This means I can never speak publicly about Richard's business or personal conduct. It's routine in high-profile divorces, Hayes replied. Mr. Wellington's reputation is a business asset. The agreement protects both parties from future disputes. Sarah signed anyway. She had no choice. Jenny was in surgery, and the hospital required payment authorization before they could proceed with the reconstructive work she needed. When Sarah arrived home, she found Richard in his office, on a video call with investors. He looked up and smiled at her, giving a thumbs up. The money had been transferred. Jenny's surgery was funded. Sarah should have felt relief, but instead she felt hollow. She had traded her voice, her chance for justice, her dignity for money. It was the right choice for Jenny, for her unborn child, but it felt like selling her soul. That night, Richard was unusually attentive. He ordered dinner from Sarah's favorite restaurant, asked about her day, even rubbed her feet while they watched television. I know this has been difficult, he said gently, but you made the right choice, Sarah, for everyone. Did I? You saved your sister's life. You secured your child's future. You chose family over revenge. That takes wisdom. His words sounded reasonable, but Sarah heard the subtext. She had chosen survival over resistance. She had proven she could be bought. When will the divorce be final? She asked. My lawyers are expediting everything. Probably within 30 days. You'll be free to start your new life. Free. The word felt like mockery. Sarah was more trapped now than ever, bound by legal agreements that silenced her permanently. Over the next week, Sarah tried to focus on practical matters. She found a house to rent in Portland, far from Richard's world. She researched obstetricians, prepared for the move, tried to imagine a life beyond the wreckage of her marriage. But at night, alone in the guest bedroom she now occupied, Sarah was haunted by what-if scenarios. What if she had been braver? What if she had trusted David Kim, risked everything to expose Richard's crimes? What if she had found a way to fight back instead of surrendering? The guilt was consuming her. She had witnessed financial fraud that would hurt innocent investors, and she had chosen silence to protect herself and her family. She understood why, knew it was rational, but the knowledge felt like poison in her veins. Sarah's breaking point came when she discovered how Richard had orchestrated Jenny's accident. She wasn't looking for evidence. She had given up that fight. But while packing Richard's study, moving books he wanted to keep, she found a business card wedged between two legal volumes. Premier Investigations, the card read. Surveillance and Risk Management Services. Sarah stared at the card for a long time. It could be innocent. Richard might legitimately need private investigators for business purposes. But something about finding it hidden in his law books felt wrong. She photographed the card and did a reverse phone number search online. Premier Investigations specialized in what their website euphemistically called problem resolution services. Reading between the lines, they seemed to offer intimidation, stalking, and sabotage services to wealthy clients. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through their service descriptions. Asset location, surveillance of family members, traffic accident reconstruction, insurance claim management. The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Richard hadn't just taken advantage of Jenny's accident. He had caused it. Sarah ran to the bathroom and vomited until nothing remained but bile and rage. When she finally stopped retching, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. She looked like a ghost of the woman she used to be. But in those hollow eyes, Sarah saw something she hadn't expected. Not just defeat, but fury. White-hot, purifying anger that burned away the last of her fear. Richard had crossed a line from which there could be no return. He had tried to kill her sister to force Sarah's surrender. The settlement agreement she had signed was obtained through fraud, coercion, and attempted murder, which meant Legally, it was worthless. Sarah walked back to Richard's study and photographed every document she could find. Bank statements, investor presentations, communications with premier investigations. She worked methodically, efficiently, like the social worker she used to be building a case file. When Richard came home that evening, he found Sarah in the kitchen, cooking dinner as if nothing had changed. "You seem better today," he observed. "I am," Sarah replied. "I think I'm finally accepting reality." "Good. Acceptance is the first stage of healing." They ate dinner in companionable silence. Richard talked about his upcoming IPO, the investors he was meeting with, his excitement about the company's future. Sarah nodded and smiled, playing the part of the defeated ex-wife who no longer posed a threat. After dinner, Richard retreated to his study while Sarah cleaned the kitchen. She could hear him on conference calls, his voice confident and commanding as he discussed stock valuations and market projections. Sarah finished loading the dishwasher and walked quietly upstairs. In the guest bedroom, she pulled out her laptop and composed an email to David Kim. "Mr. Kim, I have the evidence you need to expose AI dynamics. More importantly, I have evidence that Richard Wellington attempted to have my sister killed to force me to sign a settlement agreement. I'm ready to tell the world who Richard Wellington really is. When can we meet?" She sent the email and sat back, feeling calmer than she had in months. The settlement agreement meant nothing if it had been obtained through fraud and attempted murder. The non-disclosure clauses were unenforceable if Richard had committed crimes to obtain Sarah's signature. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. "I'm sorry I almost gave up," she whispered. "But Mommy's going to fight now. I'm going to make sure the world knows what kind of man your father really is." Her phone buzzed with a response from David Kim. "Tomorrow, early. This story's going to change everything." Sarah smiled for the first time in weeks. Richard thought he had won completely, thought he had broken her beyond repair. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. Sarah met David Kim at dawn in Griffith Park, far from any location Richard might monitor. The journalist looked like he hadn't slept, his hair disheveled and coffee-stained notes spilling from his briefcase. "I've been working all night," he said without preamble. "What you sent me is explosive, but I need to verify everything before publication. Are you absolutely certain Richard arranged your sister's accident?" Sarah handed him copies of the Premier Investigations documents she had found, along with financial records showing payments to the company that coincided with Jenny's crash. "The timing is too perfect to be coincidental," she said. "Jenny was hit 3 days after I refused Richard's initial settlement offer. The hospital bills created exactly the pressure he needed to force my cooperation." Kim studied the documents, occasionally whistling under his breath. "This isn't just divorce fraud anymore," he said finally. "This is attempted murder, securities fraud, and racketeering. Sarah, when this story breaks, Richard is going to face federal charges. Are you prepared for what that means?" "What does it mean?" "It means your $3 million settlement disappears when his assets are frozen. It means testifying before federal prosecutors. It means Richard will use every resource he has to destroy your credibility, your reputation, your life." Sarah had spent the night considering exactly those consequences. The safe path was to take Richard's money and disappear quietly. But the safe path meant letting him continue defrauding investors, meant allowing other women to face the same systematic destruction she had experienced. "I can't let him get away with it," she said. "Even if fighting him costs you everything." Sarah thought about her unborn child, about the kind of world she wanted to bring her into. A world where powerful men faced consequences for their actions, or a world where they bought silence and continued their crimes. "Especially then," Kim smiled grimly. "Then let's burn his empire down." They spent 3 hours going through every document Sarah had copied. Kim explained how each piece fit into the larger pattern of fraud, how Richard had systematically deceived investors while enriching himself through shell companies and fake metrics. "The user inflation alone is worth $50 million in fraudulent investment," Kim said, "but the self-dealing through his shell corporations pushes the total over $200 million. This is going to be one of the biggest tech fraud cases in years. When will you publish?" "Tonight." "But Sarah, the moment this story goes live, Richard will know you're the source. You need to be somewhere safe." Sarah had already considered this. Richard's reaction to exposure would be swift and brutal. She needed protection and allies. "I'm going to Detroit," she said. "Jenny's being discharged from the hospital tomorrow. We can support each other." "Good. But before you go, we need to get you on record with federal authorities. I have contacts at the FBI's white-collar crime division. They'll want to interview you immediately." The FBI interview took place that afternoon in a downtown federal building. Agent Maria Santos was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who specialized in corporate fraud cases. She listened to Sarah's story without interruption, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or financial details. "Mrs. Wellington," Agent Santos said finally, "you understand that cooperating with this investigation makes you a federal witness? We can provide protection, but your life is going to change dramatically. It's already changed dramatically. Not like this. Richard Wellington has resources most criminals don't possess. He can hire the best defense attorneys, private investigators, public relations firms. He's going to come after you with everything he has." Sarah had seen Richard's ruthlessness firsthand. She knew he would try to destroy her credibility, paint her as a vengeful ex-wife seeking attention. But she also knew the evidence was overwhelming. "Can you protect me?" "We can try. Witness protection might be necessary if threats escalate. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Sarah touched her belly. Her child deserved to grow up in a world where truth mattered more than money. "Yes." Agent Santos smiled for the first time during the interview. "Then let's put Richard Wellington where he belongs." That evening, Sarah packed hastily while Richard attended a business dinner. She took only essentials: clothes, documents, personal items. Everything else belonged to Richard's world, a world she was finally leaving behind. She was loading her car when her phone rang. "David Kim, the story goes live in 30 minutes, he said. "Are you somewhere safe?" "I'm leaving for the airport now." "Good. Sarah, this story is going to explode. Every major news outlet will pick it up within hours. By tomorrow, Richard Wellington will be the most notorious name in Silicon Valley. Thank you, David, for everything. Thank you for having the courage to speak up. A lot of people are going to benefit from your bravery." Sarah drove through the dark Los Angeles streets toward LAX, feeling lighter with each mile. The city that had trapped her was disappearing in her rearview mirror, along with the life that had never really belonged to her. At the airport, she checked her phone one final time. Kim's story was live on the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline read, "AI Dynamics CEO accused of massive fraud, attempted murder and divorce case." The article was devastating, methodical, comprehensive. Kim had included statements from anonymous investors, SEC officials, and former AI Dynamics employees. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Sarah's phone began buzzing with calls from unknown numbers. Reporters, probably, looking for additional comments. She turned off the device and boarded her flight to Detroit. 5 hours later, Sarah landed in her hometown to find the story dominating national news. Richard's company stock had been halted from trading. Federal agents were serving search warrants at AI Dynamics offices. Richard himself was nowhere to be found. Jenny was waiting at baggage claim, walking with a cane but otherwise recovered from her surgeries. "I saw the news," Jenny said, embracing her sister carefully. "Are you okay?" Sarah looked around the Detroit airport, at the familiar faces and accents of her childhood home. For the first time in months, she felt safe. "I think I'm going to be," she said. But as they walked toward Jenny's car, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You have no idea what you've started. This isn't over. ER." Sarah showed the message to Jenny, who read it and shook her head. "That sounds like a threat." "It is a threat. But Jenny, I'm not scared anymore. Let him come. I have the FBI, the media, and the truth on my side." "And me," Jenny added. "You have me." Sarah smiled, feeling stronger than she had in years. Richard had spent months trying to isolate her, convince her she was powerless and alone. He had been wrong on both counts. The first wave of Richard's counterattack came within 24 hours of Sarah's arrival in Detroit. A team of private investigators descended on her hometown, interviewing neighbors, former colleagues, anyone who might provide damaging information about her credibility or character. Sarah watched from Jenny's apartment as men in expensive suits knocked on doors throughout their old neighborhood. offering money for dirt on the Wellington woman who had destroyed a prominent businessman's life. "They're not finding much," Jenny observed, peering through the curtains. "Mrs. Rodriguez just told one of them that you were the sweetest girl in the neighborhood and he could go to hell." Sarah managed a smile. Detroit loyalty ran deep, and Richard's investigators were learning that money couldn't buy cooperation in a community that had watched Sarah grow up. The second wave was more sophisticated. Richard's public relations team launched a coordinated media campaign portraying Sarah as an unstable, vindictive ex-wife who had fabricated evidence to punish her successful husband. They leaked carefully edited documents suggesting Sarah had been stealing from joint accounts, using drugs during pregnancy, making false accusations against multiple men. Sarah watched the character assassination unfold on cable news, feeling sick as talking heads debated her mental state and motives. Richard had transformed her from whistleblower to villain in the span of 48 hours. "Don't watch this garbage," Jenny said, changing the channel. "They're just defending their own interests. Rich men protect rich men." But the damage was spreading. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters wanting her response to Richard's allegations. Some were legitimately seeking her side of the story. Others seemed intent on catching her in inconsistencies or emotional outbursts. Agent Santos called on the third day with mixed news. "Richard's media strategy is sophisticated, but it's not affecting the criminal investigation," she said. "We have the evidence we need regardless of public perception. However, I'm concerned about your safety. Richard's people are getting increasingly aggressive in their attempts to locate you." "And what kind of aggressive? Attempted break-ins at your old apartment in Los Angeles? Surveillance of your sister's workplace? Pressure on your family members? This goes beyond standard legal defense tactics." Sarah felt the familiar chill of fear. Richard wasn't just trying to discredit her. He was hunting her. "We can offer formal witness protection," Santos continued. "New identities, relocation, federal security, but it would mean cutting ties with your family and current life completely." Sarah looked around Jenny's small apartment, at the photos of their childhood, their parents, the life they had built together. The thought of abandoning everything felt like another victory for Richard. "How long before you arrest him?" "Soon. We're coordinating with the SEC and state prosecutors." "But Sarah, arrest doesn't mean safety. Men like Richard have resources even from prison. You need to consider protection seriously." That evening, Sarah sat on Jenny's couch, staring at legal documents outlining witness protection options, complete severance from her past life in exchange for safety. It felt like Richard was still controlling her choices, still forcing her into exile. Her contemplation was interrupted by breaking news on television. David Kim appeared on screen, standing outside AI Dynamics headquarters as federal agents carried boxes of evidence to waiting cars. "Richard Wellington surrendered to authorities this morning," Kim reported. "He's been charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Additional charges related to the attempted murder of his estranged sister-in-law are expected within days." Sarah felt something release in her chest. Richard was in custody. The investigation had moved beyond her testimony to encompass his entire criminal enterprise. Her phone rang immediately. "Agent Santos, did you see the news? Just now. Does this mean I'm safer?" "Somewhat. Richard's been denied bail due to flight risk, but he's already hired the best defense team money can buy. They're going to argue that you're an unreliable witness with ulterior motives. Can they succeed? Not with the evidence we have. Sarah, your testimony was crucial, but we've corroborated everything through independent sources, financial records, SEC investigations, witness statements from Richard's employees. This case doesn't depend on you alone anymore." For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she could breathe completely. What happens next? Grand jury testimony, probably within weeks, then trial preparation. It's going to be a long process, but we're confident about conviction. After hanging up, Sarah walked to the window of Jenny's apartment and looked out at the Detroit skyline. The city looked different now, not like a place she had escaped from, but like home, the place where she had learned values that Richard's money couldn't corrupt. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah's heart jumped, expecting another threat from Richard. Instead, she found a message from her former colleague in social work. "Saw the news? You're a hero. Sarah, What you did took incredible courage. If you ever want to come back to helping families, we'd be honored to have you." More messages followed. Friends from college, neighbors from Detroit, strangers who had read her story and wanted to express support. For every manufactured headline questioning her motives, there were real people who recognized her courage. Jenny found her crying on the couch an hour later. "Bad news?" Jenny asked, concerned. "Good news, really good news. Jenny, people believe me. Real people, not just investigators or lawyers. They see what Richard tried to do, and they support what I did." Jenny sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. "Of course they do. You're a hero, Sarah. You stopped a criminal who was stealing millions from investors. You exposed a man who tried to have his wife's sister killed. You did the right thing, even when it cost you everything." Sarah wiped her tears and looked at her sister. "It didn't cost me everything. I still have you. I still have the baby. I still have the truth. And your strength. Richard tried to break that, but he failed." That night, Sarah slept peacefully for the first time in months. Richard was in federal custody. The investigation had moved beyond her single testimony to encompass his entire criminal organization. The media campaign against her was losing momentum as evidence mounted. Most importantly, Sarah had found her voice again, not just as a whistleblower, but as a woman who refused to be silenced by wealth and intimidation. The battle wasn't over. Trials and testimonies still lay ahead. But the war had turned decisively in favor of truth and justice. Richard Wellington had finally met an opponent he couldn't buy, threaten, or destroy. He had met a woman who valued her integrity more than her safety, her child's future more than her own comfort, and justice more than money. He had met Sarah Mitchell, and she was no longer afraid. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the witness box of a federal courthouse in Los Angeles, 8 months pregnant and radiating quiet strength. The courtroom was packed with reporters, investors, and spectators who had followed the Wellington fraud case through every twist and revelation. Richard sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, flanked by 3 expensive attorneys who had failed to suppress the evidence or discredit the witnesses. He looked older, diminished, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. When their eyes met, Sarah felt nothing, no fear, no anger, just the calm satisfaction of truth finally being heard. "Mrs. Mitchell," the federal prosecutor began, using Sarah's maiden name at her request, "please tell the jury how you discovered your husband was defrauding investors in AI Dynamics." Sarah had told this story dozens of times to investigators, grand juries, and pretrial hearings. But this was different. This was final testimony that would determine Richard's fate and vindicate her courage in speaking out. She spoke clearly, methodically, without emotion. The accidental text message that revealed the affair, the systematic financial abuse, the evidence of corporate fraud hidden in Richard's home office, the attempted murder of her sister designed to force her silence. The defense attorneys had prepared for emotional outbursts, dramatic accusations, inconsistencies they could exploit. Instead, they faced a composed woman presenting documented facts in the same steady voice she had once used to help families in crisis. "Mrs. Mitchell?" Richard's lead attorney began his cross-examination. "Isn't it true that you only made these accusations after discovering your husband's infidelity? Isn't this simply the revenge of a woman scorned?" Sarah looked at the lawyer steadily. "Sir, if I wanted revenge, I would have exposed Richard's crimes immediately. Instead, I tried to save our marriage. I only came forward when I realized innocent investors were being defrauded, and when Richard attempted to have my sister killed." The attorney pressed on, trying to establish financial motives, emotional instability, anything that might undermine her credibility. But Sarah had been preparing for this moment for months. Every question was answered calmly. Every accusation met with documented evidence. When cross-examination ended, the prosecutor stood for redirect examination. "Mrs. Mitchell, you gave up a $3 million settlement to testify against your husband. Why?" Sarah placed her hand on her swollen belly and looked directly at the jury. "Because I wanted my child to grow up in a world where the truth matters more than money, where powerful people face consequences for their actions, where women who speak out against abuse are believed and protected, not destroyed." The jury deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered the verdict that made national headlines. Guilty on all counts. Richard Wellington was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $200 million in restitution to defrauded investors. The AI Dynamics empire collapsed completely, but the settlement fund provided partial compensation to victims of his fraud. After the trial, Sarah held a press conference on the courthouse steps. She was visibly pregnant now, glowing with health and vindication. "This case was never about my marriage," she told the assembled reporters. "It was about holding powerful people accountable for their crimes." Richard Wellington used his wealth to manipulate, threaten, and silence anyone who challenged him. Today, justice proved that no one is above the law. A reporter raised her hand. "What's next for you, Mrs. Mitchell?" Sarah smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'm going home to Detroit. I'm having my baby, and I'm returning to social work, helping other women who find themselves trapped by powerful abusers." The Rising Light Foundation opened its doors 6 months after Sarah's daughter was born. The nonprofit organization, funded partly by Sarah's share of the restitution settlement, provided legal aid, counseling, and safe housing for women escaping financial and domestic abuse. Sarah's story became a case study in law schools and business ethics courses. She spoke at conferences about corporate whistleblowing, women's rights, and the intersection of domestic and financial abuse. Her daughter, Emma, grew up surrounded by strong women who had survived impossible odds and chosen courage over safety. Richard served his full sentence without parole. He wrote letters to Sarah from prison, sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading, occasionally apologetic. She never responded to any of them. He had become irrelevant to her story, a cautionary tale rather than a defining trauma. On Emma's 5th birthday, Sarah took her daughter to visit Jenny, now fully recovered and working as a hospital administrator. The sisters sat on Jenny's porch, watching Emma play in the yard, surrounded by the neighborhood where they had grown up, believing that good people were rewarded and bad people faced consequences. "Do you ever regret it?" Jenny asked. "Walking away from all that money? Putting yourself through the trial? All of it?" Sarah watched her daughter chase butterflies across the grass, fearless and joyful in the way only children can be. "Never," she said. "Emma will grow up knowing that her mother chose truth over comfort, justice over silence. That when powerful people tried to destroy us, we fought back and won. And that her aunt is pretty tough too," Jenny added with a grin. Sarah laughed, feeling the warmth of family and community that Richard's wealth had never provided. "The toughest. We both are." That evening, as Sarah read Emma a bedtime story, her daughter looked up with curious eyes. "Mama, why do people say you're brave?" Sarah considered the question carefully, wanting to give her daughter an answer she could understand and carry with her. "Because sometimes doing the right thing is scary and hard, but we do it anyway, because it's right, and because little girls like you deserve a world where the truth matters." Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. "Will I be brave like you?" Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead, tasting the promise of a future built on integrity rather than illusion. "You already are, sweetheart. You already are." Outside, Detroit hummed with the energy of a city rebuilding itself, just as Sarah had rebuilt her life from the ashes of betrayal. She had learned that destruction could be the beginning of creation, that losing everything could teach you what truly mattered, that the strongest foundations were built not on wealth or status, but on courage, truth, and love. Richard Wellington had tried to erase her, silence her, destroy her completely. Instead, he had forged her into something unbreakable. A woman who knew her worth had nothing to do with his approval. Her power came from within, and her legacy would be measured not by what she accumulated, but by what she fought for. The girl from Detroit who had once been dazzled by a tech mogul's charm was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced the worst of human nature and chosen to respond with the best of her own. The battle was over. The victory was complete. And Sarah Mitchell was finally, truly free. And there you have it, the incredible true story of how one woman's courage brought down a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Sarah Mitchell proved that when you fight for what's right, even the most powerful people in the world can be held accountable. If this story moved you, if it made you believe that justice can prevail against impossible odds, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where speaking the truth came at a personal cost? Share your story, Your courage might inspire someone else who's struggling. Hit that like button if you believe stories like Sarah's deserve to be heard. And if you want more true stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when it matters most, subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell. Because everyone deserves to know that they're stronger than they think, braver than they believe, and never as alone as they feel. Thanks for staying with me for Sarah's journey. I'll see you in the next story, where we'll discover that sometimes the greatest victories come from the greatest defeats. Until then, remember, the truth is always worth fighting for.